welcome to SENSESPACE. Today I'm here with Matthew Green and Claude Terosier, hopefully getting that French dialect just right there. This is really a conversation building on Matthew's recent Resonant World substack, in which Claude was featured and spoke about Claude's group dialogue practices, and also drawing on Claude's substack, which elucidates her journey and exploration around race and heritage and identity, as a French woman of I guess African descent. I'm going to kind of leave it to you to properly to introduce yourselves, but yeah, really great to have you guys here. And I know we're going to be getting into some deep and new territory, and also seeing how we can draw on the resources of this kind of coherence-oriented dialogue practice to get closer to some new truths and tap into some new energies, and hopefully allow a space where some insight can emerge. So with that, thank you both and welcome to the space. Claude, would you like to pick up where my limited introduction left off, and tell us a little bit about how you come to this dialogue and what you bring?
Yeah, well, thank you, Jacob, for having me with Matt. It's kind of continuing a conversation that I've had started with Matt, but this time with you and maybe with more people taking part. So I'm very happy about that. It's very interesting because, when you open up, I was wondering, how am I going to present myself, to introduce myself, because I've been kind of changing my role in society. I used to, I've worked for like 15 years in corporate telecommunication, and then I used to study my company, run it for like 8 years. And I was teaching kids to code creatively. But the funny thing is now, I'm on like kind of a different journey about, and it's hard to put into words, but getting deeper to who am I really, and how can I show up in life more. And so with Matt, we are both students of Thomas Hübl for like a year and a half in a deep process of transformation and looking into individual, transgenerational, and collective trauma. And in that process, we have had many discussions. And one of the things that emerged for me recently, these few months, is I am French, but I was born in the Caribbean, in the French West Indies, in an island called Guadeloupe. And my father's Black, my mother's white, but it's even more complicated than that. My mother is actually from Paris, and her family is from the north of France. So it's very, white. It's a normal French. I don't know what normal means, but French lineage. And my father was born in Guadeloupe, and is Black, and basically his family is from a lineage of slaves. Because and of course people come from Africa. We come from Africa for like. So that was I don't know when, they arrived in this island. It probably was like 200 years ago, at least, maybe 3. So my feeling of when I fit into my lineage, I don't really fit into Africa. I really fit into the Caribbean and slavery, basically, and the legacy of slavery, and that has come like and it's something that has been very hard for me to look into. And with this work with Thomas Hübl, I have started really looking into me, what it means, and how can I integrate that, because I cannot be whole without welcoming both parts in me. And that's kind of a challenge, because that's exactly what is hard in the world around us. Welcoming both parts is very, it's not happening right now exactly. So I don't know if that gives more context to your introduction, Jacob.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I'll pass it over to Matthew now to also give a little introduction. And it's so wonderful, these these relationships that have been forming inside of Thomas Hübl's course, and how there's a similarity of the work in some sense of the field and the practices, but where that goes is so different. There's so many different routes that are being kind of uncovered and brought through, and so this is a very new there's always new conversations emerging out of this space with such depth to them.
I feel very relieved in a way to be able to have this conversation, even as I feel a degree of trepidation or uncertainty as we move into this topic of race and racism. I'm a journalist. I spent 8 years as a journalist in Africa, and I've worked in Afghanistan, Pakistan, other countries, many of which were former colonies of the UK or other countries. And I don't feel I've ever really had a thorough reckoning with my own relationship to those experiences, or certainly aspects of those experiences, or the topic of race and racism and being a white man in relationship with that. I'll just take a little pause as I move into this, because and I'll say what I've really valued is what I've been learning from you, Claude. And I feel like your level of exploration and courage and transparency on this theme is so far in advance of mine. I'm in awe, in a way, of how you've been doing this work, and how I saw this particular aspect of the work kind of arrive almost suddenly earlier this year, or maybe a little bit before that. And we've been talking about other things prior to that. And so I've been a kind of witness to your process, and at the same time challenged in my own process to look at where racism lives in me, and where resistance to this topic lives in me, and also noticing my resistance to a lot of what we're now told about this topic, or what we're kind of supposed to think or supposed to say, like a real reluctance to kind of do anything or say things that feel performative, or that I kind of should say. And what I've felt in our interactions is that something much deeper has come through. I've been able to, I've often felt at times quite uncomfortable when I've listened to things that you've said that have made me, physically feel quite like not good. I can't even really tell you what the word for the feeling is, but it's like, oh, there's something happening to me, which when confronted with this material is not comfortable. And at the same time, we've somehow kind of forged this connection where that hasn't meant that either of us, or I've certainly not walked away from it. So that feels like a slightly maybe kind of roundabout introduction, but it's really, I'm really eager to, in a way, hear what you want to know. Like, you can ask me anything you like, really. And I almost feel like you, because of what you've written and what you've said, like I almost have more transparency over your process maybe than you do over mine. But I'll rest it there.
Thank you, Matthew. Yeah, really holistic introduction, and the recognition that this is, apart from the kind of recognition, not looking at this. There is a lot of looking at this going on, and it's a real fault line. It's a real culture war frontier, and there's a lot of pain, and there's a lot of shadow, and there's a lot of things going on in the effort to make amends or bring consilience or something like that. And so I haven't delved very deeply into these conversations. I've witnessed some of those ways of going about it that feel off in some way. But I have a deep faith in what we're doing here. And so I'm very interested to go there.
Thank you, Jacob. Shall I? Yeah.
Take it away.
The first thing I want to say, Matt, is I am really grateful for how you opened this conversation right now, and how you were very honest in your vulnerability about the topic. It actually brought me deeper and deeper in contact with the topic. Yeah. And you know what is very live in me right now is my process around many things, and especially about at the moment about my relation to being Black, and actually being Black is a strange word, you know, because I'm many things, and I actually, if you look at my blood, I have more white blood than Black blood, so it's also interesting. But that's another topic. You know, when do you call yourself Black? What does it mean? You know, it means very different thing for very different people. It's different when you're in Africa. It's different when you're in the United States. In the Caribbean, in the French Caribbean, it's also different because the French culture is different. But anyway, what my process is a lot about, I need that what I am is allowed. And I need that what happened to my ancestors is acknowledged. And it's interesting because, and I don't know how people will react to what I say. I haven't given a lot of thought to the towards amends, you know, reparation. Really, for me, the step that matters most is acknowledgement. That I don't have to make apologies for what happened. That it is seen, and that it can become not a big deal anymore in a way. And that's why it's very important that Matt, when you are voicing your discomfort when you hear me say some things, you know, that's exactly what is important, and that that we can witness your discomfort and we can include it, because this discomfort that creates a separation, that people cannot look at the topic because it's too uncomfortable. I don't know if I'm making any sense, but really it's about holding space for my need to be seen fully, and your discomfort in seeing me or seeing, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm thinking of, and obviously we don't. Some of this has taken place in kind of confidential spaces, so we won't like describe precisely like what happened. But I could say one of the things I noticed was my resistance or my discomfort. Like, and as I say, there's a quality to it which is, I can't really find a word for it, but it's very specific around race and racism. There's a very sort of bodily quality of kind of contraction, and my mind goes into, am I on the right side of this? Like, am I don't want to be in the wrong here. Am I one of the good ones? And it was once in response to some anger that you were expressing over what, as I understood, you experienced as the failure or reluctance of white people to do this, to offer this acknowledgement, to look at this topic. And when I felt your anger at that failure, it made me feel very uncomfortable. And actually, after I heard that, and I'd gone through that, and I sat with the discomfort, and I was sort of weighing the ledger in my mind of, I'm not really racist, I can do this work. But yeah, in my body, I was like, ooh, like there's something here. And that's actually when I reached out to you and we talked one-on-one in more depth. And I recognized there was something I was able to remember incidents where Black people had spoken up in a certain way that I'd felt uncomfortable with, or I'd felt they were kind of like, the way that something was being expressed wasn't kind of fair, and you were able to sort of reframe that for me and kind of ask me, well, have you thought about what's really going on in that space? Is that actually the voice of somebody who's been repressed for so long that they're just taking that opportunity to speak? And I had to look at my reaction, and I recognized the resistance I had to that voice, and it was quite it was powerful for me to see quite how much resistance I'd carried at times, so, and I was really grateful that we were able to have the relational connection where you could allow me that, and I didn't feel like you were judging me, actually.
I guess one of the reasons why I'm not judging you is because I have also this part that doesn't want to look at it, that I have internalized the reluctance to look at it. I know, and actually the anger is also, I needed the anger to walk past that resistance, or something like that. Yeah.
I'm wondering about this resistance that we can feel. It seems to me that for a long period of time, I would have found it very difficult to see myself in the shoes of the colonial white ancestors. And as I mentioned before this, my exploration of ancestral trauma has been much more to do with war. And there's a real similarity for me in this of not being able to see oneself as the soldiers in war who commit atrocities, who do violence. And so there's some similarity in my experience of this conversation of the shift that occurs when something's been cleared or some perspectival shift has occurred, and now I can actually feel that person or that potential within myself. I can feel the energetic capacity for violence or the energetic capacity to oppress. I would even extend this, more widely, I think. And it's not at all to lead us out of this conversation, but to say that there's a real analogous necessity to be able to see ourselves in the shoes of the oppressors of history, to be able to see ourselves as the Nazis in Germany, not in an abstraction, but to really, really get into that feels important. So how does that feel? Yeah, how does that land in relation to the resistances you guys have each felt in relation to this?
Yeah, there is one thing that I can share is I mentioned earlier that on my Black lineage from my father, so my father's mother, my grandmother, was the daughter of the descendant of a slave owner, a white man. You know, so basically a man whose family has been there for a century on the island and has made a living out of running exploitation with slaves. And it's only when I wrote about that, like I think it was a couple of months ago, and I had to write about it and put it out in the world. And it's only after that I realized that that white man is my ancestor. And until now, it's like I wasn't counting him as my ancestor, you know? And I think that's exactly the resistance. Like, I don't want to, it's hard for me to own up. It's easier in a way sometimes. And I don't know, you know, when you're on the victim side, you're on the right side, you can be righteous, you know, and it's not comfortable to own up that I'm also the great granddaughter of a slave owner, you know, and it relates to, I know that's a part of the journey that I haven't completed yet about my getting, expanding my ability to include to own up the perpetrator side in me too, which I think is what basically you were talking about, Jacob.
Yeah, so such a unique stand to try and take and to hold in your own lineage of being on both sides of it.
Yeah. And something else that came up to me when I was listening to you was about so at the same time I don't want to own it up. I mean, I can clearly, I have a resistance, you know, to own up to the perpetrator side in me. And at the same time, one thing that helped me talk about the topic, voice it loud, was the fact that one thing that I can own up is that I'm racist too. And also because so I grew up in the Caribbean, as I say, in Guadeloupe, and there everybody is racist in the sense that race, everybody ranks people according to their shade of skin, and everybody does that, and it's normal. That's how things are run, you know. You do it consciously or unconsciously. Actually, we have a name for every different shades of color, you know, because it relates basically to power. So in that sense, you know, I am owning up to the perpetrator side. I don't know if it makes sense, but
I think just one more. No, actually, please go ahead, Matthew.
I was going to say that actually, Claude, when you wrote that, saying I'm racist and in fact sexist as well, I think, but you to own your racism in that way was a massive thing for me to witness, because I mean, and after I read it, I was like, maybe I should write something about my racism, but I thought, oh, like, I'm not sure that I'm ready to do that, actually. I think I'd be kind of too scared to do that. But as you were talking just now about owning the perpetration in the lineage, I was thinking, well, what about the perpetration in my own life? And I was thinking about living, well, there's levels of it. The whole of, you know, our modern civilization is based on the slave economy and capitalist exploitation, which is barely acknowledged or just totally absent. And even as I say that, there's a voice that comes in and says, I don't want to be like one of those politically correct white guys who's trying to demonstrate how woke he is. Like, there's another part of me that almost like doesn't want to kind of embrace that identity, actually, really, and has a lot of questions about that kind of ideology and that frame, that woke kind of frame. But on the other hand, yeah, that's the reality, the historical reality. So there's that whole layer, but also I think about the life I led when I was in Africa, and it was a post-colonial environment, still is a post-colonial environment, where of course I had enormous privileges as a white man. I mean, you know, almost shockingly so. And, you know, you spoke about exploring your unconscious and conscious biases as a result of the cultural background you come from and the Caribbean. But I've recognized that I barely really looked at how that was showing up for me in Africa. And, you know, there's part of me that says, oh, I was always a nice guy and, you know, respected people. But I wonder, actually, if I really looked at that more closely, I might start to see some things that were pretty, would make me feel quite uncomfortable, actually. So when you owned that, I thought that was an incredibly like generous offering, because it gave me space to sort of own it and allow that it's something that is there to look at. And there's also another level maybe as well, I'll bring it back to in the work we're doing, when that it's when I hear the personal experience of a Black person, when I hear that voice, when it's coming from that authentic experience and captures the complexity, that's when I'm completely captivated, and when I feel my whole body kind of resonating with what's being said in a way that I don't when I'm kind of handed the kind of ideological script that I'm supposed to follow. And that's why I believe in the power of these kinds of dialogues, because it's where if we can sit with the discomfort and feel held in it, that's when something new can open up, I think. But I sort of a sub point's coming, like some people might be listening to this and saying, well, why was it up to Claude to be the first one to be courageous, right? And acknowledging, you know, why should you be the one who has to write the substack on this?
You know, on that part, you know, and it's very interesting. My first reaction is just to say, and it's well known, I mean, it's easier for me because I've been confronted with a problem. I cannot escape it. So, you know, I have to look into it. Whereas when you're white, you don't, and most of the time you don't have to look into it. You're not, and that's exactly the problem of white privilege, but it happens in any kind of privilege. When you have something, you don't realize what it is to not have it, you know. So that's the first reaction in me. And then there is also the other reaction, a bit like, yeah, why am I doing the work? Yeah, some people would say, you know, why am I doing the work? Again, maybe because I'm both, you know. Also, I can relate to both. I'm trying to relate to both sides. It's like a bridge.
Yeah, maybe I can add some pieces to this. I think, well, for me, growing up in the south of England in a mostly white town and going to a school that was very progressive, in which we were kind of, you know, we were taught about the UN goals, and it was kind of Christian, and we were also very much against racism. It was so against racism that it was to the point that to use race as a relevant descriptor, like, oh, I remember a boy in my school I said that, you know, there was a black taxi driver, and he was like, oh, you can't say that, it's racist. So it like gone out the other way. And I wasn't really aware of race growing up. And it was only when I went to university that I became friends with lots of mixed race people who hold the complexity of this, and was shocked to discover that my friends with Indian parents and my friends with Chinese parents were having much more confronting experience of racism in their own parents. So this was another like whoosh, like, oh, okay, racism it's no longer something that's particularly confined to white people in relation to black people, but it's kind of a wholesale matrix that we're all participating in. And it's almost as if Western culture has kind of, white European culture has been sort of ridden the wave of this around the world, and then gotten to a place where it doesn't seem relevant, or we feel we've moved into a post-racial situation. But then all over China, all over Asia, all over India, all over all of these parts of the world, it's absolutely a defining matrix of how people experience themselves. And there's still this desire to be white. But like there's a whole industry behind that. And so still I felt like I think I still had this post-racial feeling for myself until some years ago I was confronted by one of my partners who was also white, but had grown up in part of the United States that was much more mixed race. And she confronted me around rapping the N-word with rap songs, which is a very conventional area that this pops up. And I definitely didn't want to feel the racial power that that word had through me. I wanted to relate to it through that kind of post-racial lens. And truly, I felt that that was the most progressive standpoint to be in, is that I'm somehow independent of this. I'm beyond this. But there was something that she kind of jabbed at, and I did feel a bit shamed, to be honest with you. But the effect of it was to make me feel the power. It was in feeling the power of racism within myself that I could exercise that dark power, that's when I really have become more connected with it, I'd say. So that's just a few pieces of my journey with this so far that hopefully feed in.
Is that okay if I react to that? And I guess react is a good word, because I feel the need to clarify a few things. That it's a complex topic. It's a complex topic. We can simplify it, like considering that we have white people from the Occident that basically colonized the rest of the other countries, and basically use the fact that they were color of skin and race to enable a clear separation and you know, create a belief system that they could exploit these people and see them as you know, less valuable, to the point of in some cases not being human. You know, I mean, the history of slavery is that basically white people from that era thought that and explained that from the Bible, that, you know, black people were like animals or were subhumans, or, you know, so there's a whole logic. So you can simplify it, but I think it's also important to take into have it, that there are different realities Like China and India are huge continents, and Africa too, huge continent, where if you go there as a white person, you're not the majority, you're minority, and they have many ways where they can feel superior to you in their own country. Maybe Africa, and again, what I would say, you should take it very, very cautious, and maybe some people are going to say I'm saying rubbish, but in Africa, maybe it's different because the whole continent was colonized, like which is not the case of China or India. Well, India, yes, but so again, you see that it's different it's complex and different than when you are in Occident, so in the UK or in France, and so in a territory where majority people are French, are white, and then you have a kind of racism where being different will give you less access to commodities, and it will happen whether you're Asian or Indian or Black, or because you're different, and also you don't have the codes, and and that's a kind of racism. But for me, it's very important to make a distinction with when I'm talking about racism. I mean, and that's why I'm talking more about slavery. And that's what's different when you use nigger word. You're not talking about having less access to commodities. You're talking about hundreds of years of abomination, of having no dignity, no power over yourself, of you could be raped, you could be killed, you could be maimed just because of your color of skin. So that's what the word nigger carries along, and I don't think it's the same with other cases. So you have to be a bit careful and that's why it's so charged, and that's why when I'm talking about we need to acknowledge this. That's what I mean. It's in the past, and actually we can have this conversation because today, as a Black person, I can have access to education. I can be rich. I can, which was not the case like a couple of centuries ago. So actually the situation is so much more better now. But there is for me, this huge need of acknowledging what has, and and there is so much pain there, so much pain. That's why you cannot use the word nigger, and I can use it because I'm Black. So Matt, I think I gave you another serving of my anger, right?
Yeah, I really feel you in that, and I really I feel I feel the charge, and I feel like this is what we came to meet in a way and be with. And I felt my own kind of, I don't want to say anxiety, but I felt, whoa, like I'm feeling Claude's anger again. Like I didn't expect it, like quite like that. And I also feel the relation. I feel that we can hold that and feel it and allow it. And I'm wondering, like, what is it challenging me? Like I'm wanting to ask the question, which maybe I'm not supposed to ask. I'm like, is this okay? Like, but what do I do? Like, what do I do? Like, what do I do with this? When I see your anger, like, what do I do? And I maybe I shouldn't even ask the question, but that's the question. I'm not asking it. I'm kind of telling you the secret question I'm holding.
Do you want an answer for that? Do you want my answer?
Yeah.
Hold it.
Yeah.
Just give space for my anger. And that's all it's about, I guess. Yeah. And actually, it's I don't know. What I'm describing, it happens in other contexts that are related to race. Exploitation, abomination happens in many other contexts. So yeah. But the anger, yeah. Yeah, and I notice I'm starting to get confused now, and my mind is not so clear, and I don't know what this means.
Yeah, I really appreciated the complexification and distinctions that you laid out. And it's really, I think it's one of the pieces that helps us get deeper into this and also into the nuance, is to go away from a highly simplified notion of racism into this multi-dimensional understanding of all of these different kinds of dominator hierarchies and their unique histories. And then this very unique charge, this unique violation, this unique experience, which is in some sense still in the ground of culture, the ground of people. And I think that comes more, there's something about the somewhat mystical quality of this collective trauma healing work that helps us to understand how the past lives in us and how the energies of the past are still, like roots running right down, and not just as a metaphor, but in some sense really, really there. I guess what's a question for me is like, what is the consequence of all of this energy staying kind of bound up for Black people, but also for white people, and then in the converse, what's the potential that we're not experiencing that we could be through the integration of the darkness of this, and perhaps not just darkness, but also, in the same way that Jewish people, victims from the Holocaust, can find real strength, fortitude in connecting with their ancestral experience. So it's almost like, where can this go? What are the pathways? What does it mean for culture?
I have to say, I really love that you asked me this question. And as you're acknowledging, there's a lot of energy that is bound here. And the truth is, I have no idea, because I'm still working with the bind, I guess. Also, something I wanted to share is that when I tap into my ancestors on that side, really what I can feel a very, very deep rage. It's like a bottomless rage. And there is a lot of energy here. And I don't know how to, I've been channeling that energy into manifestation when I started my company, when I've been using that energy, but there is probably this energy is asking for release and for transformation. And I was wondering, Matt, when you feel a lot of discomfort and express my anger, actually, it's what came to me, like you should be it should be scary, because basically you probably can feel, like it's murderous rage. Yeah.
Well, and something was coming to me as in that moment, in that I felt, and I still wonder if we've given your anger enough space. I mean, maybe there's never enough space, but even right now I was thinking, have we honored your anger enough? And I noticed a moment of like, almost, I was noticing your anger and my discomfort, and I was noticing, like, almost for Jacob, like a caretaking, like, are you okay with this anger? Like, like as a white guy, like, whoa, this is a lot. Like, and I was wondering if Jacob would speak more to it in a way. And so there was a lot coming up for me just in that moment that was complex as but really acknowledging that, yeah, like this is why when I'm in the presence of that anger, it's a feeling that I don't recognize. It's very like deep. It's not an easy feeling to sit with, because it's not an everyday feeling that I've experienced. It's very unique, has a very distinct quality about it. And yeah, I appreciate you kind of you bringing us back to that, because I was wondering, like, have we given that enough space?
May I speak to this briefly? I wonder if it's about it's more about the quality of space than the enoughness. And that part of the circumstance in relationship to the rage is like, let's give more and more and more space to it. But that the more and more space doesn't necessarily actually meet it. And it's in the meeting of it that it can be unlocked to some degree. And it's really just absolutely pertinent for me that this is where we're arriving at this moment in the dialogue, because I've been in deep inquiry into my own rage and had a sacred rage experience just yesterday, and my throat's still a little bit sore from it. And I feel absolutely transformed. I feel like an inner passage has been opened by just fucking letting it go, like, And so often in the past for me, that had a slightly masochistic undertone, like to express the rage was a little bit, there was just a tinge of it that was like self-harming. It didn't feel healthy. And I'm slowly beginning to wonder, is there a kind of sacred rage? Is there a way that I can rage and be loved? And that was what I glimpsed yesterday, to be, in a sense, witnessed by God and loved, but, loved by something greater whilst in the rage. A celebratory is where is the new frontier of rage for me, which sounds very contradictory.
Yeah, I love that you're saying that. I am still in a stage where I'm learning to welcome my rage. I haven't gotten to celebratory rage or sacred rage, but I know that for me, yeah, and now I'm already able to express it so much more than like a few months ago. That my first experience was rage, was to acknowledge that basically I was suppressing it all the time. Like there was like a big blockage in me around it. And so now I've reached that point that I can express it, and it kind of like paves the way for the next step. Like, yeah, actually, and actually, I have been a few experiences where I could express my anger, and that would strengthen the relationship instead of breaking it. And making more and more of those experiences that is what is helping me to really own it up more and more. Yeah, don't know if that resonates.
I remember when your anger, like, you came up in the group space a few months ago, it felt like there was enough safety to hold it, even though it felt dangerous and uncertain what would happen. The coherence field was strong enough to hold it. And I think what you both said about, like, as you said, Jacob, like, I can be angry and be loved. Like, so many of us have learned that anger is something that has to be hidden or suppressed, because we won't have love if we get angry, or we can't be angry in relation. So bringing anger into relation in a kind of skillful way is such an important step, I think, like way beyond this conversation, because it's a energy in society that is just coming out sideways all the time. Passive aggression and the energy of suppressed anger that's not been healthily owned is so palpable in the culture, and we have to learn how to channel it in a healthy way.
I remember a fellow participant in the TWT Thomas that once said, voiced loud, that he had witnessed so many men suffer from unattuned anger.
Unattuned anger, yeah.
Anger, yeah.
That's a good phrase.
And that he was looking forward to. He could see the power in receiving attuned anger.
Yeah, in the men's work, they talk about, like, in the legend of, there's a whole legend, the Iron John, you know the story probably, Jacob, the sort of male initiation story. And there's a moment where the young man or boy gets hit with his father's axe. Basically, he's done something really stupid, and he actually deserves to be hit with, not hit with the blade, but the flat of the axe. And it's like a moment of masculine initiation, the moment when your dad hit you with the side of the axe because basically you were being an idiot and not listening, and you were putting people in danger by being irresponsible. And that anger is part of growing into a healthy man, actually. But how many I can't remember my dad hitting me with an axe, not literally, but I can remember a male authority figure at school hitting me with an axe. Not, again, metaphorically, but I just wonder whether it's a kind of skill with working with this fire. Like, it's like, how do we, like, we either run away from it or we get burnt by it, but how do we work with it?
I feel like there's a real courage as well. It's very vulnerable to express that in groups and in front of people. It's not just like, it's not an armored state to express. It's an unarmored state. Yeah. It's completely raw. And yeah, I've been wrestling and writing for the last 2 weeks a paper about shadow masculine and how it fits into our culture today. And it does seem to be a real preponderance to sort of cut off these shadow parts, or think that they're basically just bad cultural programming, and therefore the resolution to them is to reprogram or to re-educate. But this doesn't necessarily lead to the integration of them. And I think they run very deep. And as Claude's rage indicates, they're not necessarily just confined to men. The shadow masculine extends.
You know, men, women, you know, this is the concept. Of course, but you know, the thing is, women, we learn very soon that we're not supposed to express anger. So I mean, socially, it's not, yeah, it's not welcome at all. You know, I have always this example that, like, in the 19th century in France, there was a Charcot that was studying psychologists studying women, and you know, it typed the word, it called the word hysterics. You know, when a woman would get into a very activated state, that would be a hysteric. So basically it happens to you when you feel something is wrong and you're trying to make yourself heard and nobody's listening. At some point you just blow up out of proportion, and then you're called a hysteric. which is another way of denying it. Yeah, so healthy anger, space for healthy anger,
and healthy witnessing of it, being able to be with it. Like when it's someone else's anger, there's like a responsibility to respond to that and not run away from it or shut down, or just to cultivate the capacity to hold other people's anger, I think is part of it as well, isn't it? As well as our own. Then maybe it's both the same process.
Definitely. And I think there's an interesting access to this potentially as we draw to a close. I know we're getting up to about 90 minutes. But in the men's group world and men's work world, that's one of the spaces where this kind of, that, there are processes that tend to adduce this rage, adduce these parts to come to the surface, amongst men. And in those spaces, you do see a potential for it to be met and welcomed. But then with this intersectional axis that we're in now, which is, not just Matt as a white man and Claude as a mixed color woman, but also this dimension of it's a woman's rage, and how does a man meet a woman's rage, and what role does all women's spaces and women's work have for like being a channeling port for that to come through as well. And of course Thomas Hübl stuff is combining men, women only and men, women together. So clearly there's power in both. And this has been a really incredible conversation. And the thing that stands out most for me is the place within myself I felt that I've been standing in from the outset. I really felt a drop into a depth that was very necessary to hold this terrain. And I really appreciate that, and opening the beginning of this conversation, really.
Well, thank you, Jacob, for holding the space and maneuvering yourself skillfully. And thank you, Matt, for continuing this conversation. I think it's not over.
No, doing it in public now. That's the next level.
Yeah, true enough.
Although maybe we forgot that as we were talking, right? But thank you, Claude, for being for bringing everything you brought. It's been very powerful for me. It's been another step in my process, I feel, and I'm looking forward. Even though I have my trepidation still, I'm still looking forward to what comes next. So thank you. And thank you, Jacob.
Thank you both for your courage and care and willingness to step into uncomfortable terrain intentionally. And with that, we'll close up this dialogue. And thank you to anyone who ends up joining us to listen.